my boss pointed at a $75 charge on my corporate card and called me a liar and a thief, then fired me, after I'd rescued 3 of his biggest projects over 9 years. So I took a job with his competitor and watched his clients follow. 18 months ago, my boss called me into a conference room, pointed at a $75 charge on my corporate card statement, and said loud enough for the whole office to hear, "You're a liar and a thief. You're fired." The charge? A plugin I'd purchased with his written approval to save a client from regulatory fines. Security walked me out 10 minutes later. But this wasn't about $75. This was about 9 years of me building his reputation while he took all the credit. And the second he needed a scapegoat, he threw me away. Let me show you how that decision destroyed him. My name's Ryan. I'm 34 now, but when I started at this software consulting firm back in my mid-20s, I was just a kid trying to make rent and pay off student loans. The company, Techbridge Solutions, wasn't huge. Maybe 40 people when I joined. We built custom data management systems for mid-sized companies, compliance tracking, inventory databases, financial reporting dashboards, that sort of thing. Useful, unglamorous work that kept the lights on. My boss was a guy named Derek Hastings. He was the director of client services, which meant he handled all the big client relationships and oversaw the project teams. Derek was in his early 40s, good-looking in that generic sales guy way, always wore expensive suits, always had the right joke ready for client dinners. He was confident, charming, the kind of person executives loved having in the room during pitches. The problem was, Derek couldn't actually execute anything. He was phenomenal at selling. He'd walk into a meeting, promise the moon, shake hands, close deals that brought in serious revenue. But the second it came time to actually deliver what he'd promised, he'd vanish. He'd be in meetings, or traveling to see another client, or just completely unreachable while the project team scrambled to figure out what he'd actually committed us to. That's where I came in. I was hired as a junior project coordinator. On paper, my job was administrative, schedule meetings, take notes, update timelines in our project management software, send status reports. Basic coordination stuff. But within my first 3 months, I started noticing a pattern. Derek would close a deal, promise delivery in an impossibly short timeline with features our platform didn't actually support yet, and then disappear while the developers panicked and the client started sending increasingly nervous emails. I remember the first time I stepped in to fix one of his messes. It was a manufacturing client who needed real-time inventory tracking across 3 warehouses. Derek had promised it would be live in 6 weeks. Our lead developer told me privately it would take 12 weeks minimum, and that was if everything went perfectly. The client was already frustrated because Derek had stopped returning their calls, so I called them myself. I didn't have the authority, but I figured someone needed to. I explained that we'd hit some technical complexities, walked them through what was realistic, and proposed a phased rollout. Basic tracking in 6 weeks, full real-time integration in 12. I framed it as giving them something useful immediately instead of waiting for everything at once. They agreed. They actually seemed relieved that someone was being straight with them. When Derek found out, he didn't thank me. He just said, "Good save," and then told me to keep an eye on that account. That became my actual job. Over the next year, I became the person who translated Derek's overpromises into actual deliverables. I'd sit with the developers and figure out what was technically possible. I'd go back to the client and explain the plan in language that made sense to them. I'd renegotiate timelines, manage expectations, and somehow we'd deliver something they were happy with. Derek kept selling. I kept cleaning up. By my second year, clients were asking for me by name. They'd call the main office line and say, "Can you put me through to Ryan?" They'd CC me on emails even when Derek was supposed to be the primary contact. They trusted me because I actually showed up and told them the truth. Derek's response to this was to give me more responsibility without changing my title or my salary. I was still listed as project coordinator, even though I was functionally managing 3 major accounts by myself. I was making maybe $55,000 a year while doing the work of someone who should have been making 80 or 90. I told myself it was fine. I told myself I was learning, building relationships, proving myself. Eventually Derek would notice. Eventually I'd get promoted. That never happened. Instead, Derek started taking more credit. There was this one moment, maybe 4 years in, that really crystallized it for me. We had a client in the pharmaceutical industry who was absolutely furious because a regulatory compliance report they needed wasn't generating correctly. If they missed their filing deadline with the FDA, they'd be looking at massive fines. Derek was on vacation in the Bahamas. Unreachable. The client was calling every hour, escalating to our CEO, threatening to pull their contract. I spent an entire weekend diving into the database structure, working with one of our junior developers to figure out where the error was. Turned out there was a calculation mistake buried in a stored procedure that someone had written 3 years earlier. We fixed it, tested it against their compliance requirements, and delivered a working solution Monday morning. The client sent an email to Derek that said, and I quote, "You saved our relationship with you. If we'd missed that deadline, we would have faced six-figure penalties. Thank you for your dedication and expertise." Derek forwarded that email to the executive team with a subject line that said, "Another successful client recovery." My name wasn't mentioned anywhere. I saw the email because our CEO replied all with "Great work, Derek. This is why we value your leadership." I was sitting at my desk when I read that. I remember just staring at the screen, feeling this cold weight settle in my chest. But I didn't say anything. I didn't know how to. Derek was my boss. He controlled my performance reviews, my raises, my career trajectory at that company. If I complained, I'd look petty or ungrateful. So I kept working. By year 6, I was essentially running our 3 largest accounts completely solo. I knew their systems better than their own IT teams. I knew their business cycles, their internal politics, who to talk to when we needed approvals, who to avoid during budget season. I could predict when they'd need support before they even asked for it. When something broke, they called me directly on my personal cell phone. Not the company hotline. Me. And Derek had basically stopped doing anything except showing up to quarterly business reviews to shake hands and make small talk. I started looking at other jobs. I'd update my resume, scroll through LinkedIn, see positions that paid 60 or 70% more than what I was making. But every time I got close to applying, something would happen. A project would hit a crisis. A client would specifically request me for a high-stakes implementation. And I'd think, I can't leave them in the middle of this. I was loyal. Too loyal. And Derek was counting on exactly that. The real breaking point started about 3 months before I got fired. One of our biggest clients, a national retail chain called Meridian Stores, was in the middle of a massive system overhaul. They were migrating 15 years of legacy sales data into a new analytics platform, and the deadline was brutal because they needed everything operational before their fiscal year-end reporting cycle. The project was supposed to be co-led by Derek and our most senior developer, a guy named Greg Morrison. Greg was brilliant, but he was also burned out and underpaid, same as everyone else. 3 weeks into the migration, on a Friday afternoon, Greg sent an email to HR that said he'd accepted a position at another company and wouldn't be returning. No 2 weeks' notice. Just gone. Derek completely panicked. He called me at home that night, around 10 p.m., and said, "We've got a serious problem. I need you to take over Greg's role on Meridian." I said, "Derek, I'm not a database developer. I don't write migration scripts." He said, "You understand the client better than anyone here. You can coordinate with the dev team and keep things on track. I'll handle any technical escalations that come up." That was a lie, and we both knew it. What actually happened over the next 6 weeks was this. I taught myself enough SQL and data migration logic to troubleshoot problems on my own. I stayed at the office until midnight most nights. I took calls at 2 in the morning when Meridian's IT team ran into issues during their overnight testing windows. I rewrote half the technical documentation because what Greg had left behind was incomplete and confusing. I built spreadsheets tracking every single data table, every dependency, every validation rule. I coordinated with 4 different teams across 3 time zones. I personally tested data exports against their reporting requirements to make sure nothing was missing. And Derek? Derek went on a planned vacation to Cancun with his wife. When he got back, tan and relaxed, there was an email from Meridian's VP of Operations waiting in his inbox. It said, "I don't know how you pulled this off with Greg leaving mid-project, but Ryan is a miracle worker. Our entire leadership team is impressed. Please pass along our sincere thanks." Derek replied to the VP, "We pride ourselves on delivering excellence no matter the circumstances. Glad we could meet your expectations." He never forwarded that email to me. I only saw it because the VP had CC'd me directly on a follow-up technical question. I should have been furious. I should have marched into Derek's office and demanded recognition, a promotion, a raise, something. But I was just exhausted. And by that point, I'd stopped expecting anything from him. I figured I'd finish out the year, get my annual review, and then start seriously looking for another job. Then the $75 charge happened. It was a different client, a mid-sized logistics company called FreightLink. They used our platform to generate shipping compliance reports for cross-border freight, and one morning their operations manager sent me an email with the subject line, Urgent, Compliance Deadline. The email said, "Ryan, we need to export our manifest data in a format that matches what Canadian Customs requires, and your system doesn't support this file type natively. If we can't submit this documentation by Friday, we're going to be out of compliance and facing daily penalties. Can you help?" It was Tuesday. I had 3 days. I dug into it. The file format they needed was something obscure, a specific XML schema that Canadian Customs had implemented about 6 months earlier. Our platform exported data in standard CSV and JSON formats, but not this particular XML variant. I spent about 2 hours researching solutions. I found a third-party plugin that could handle the conversion. It was made by a reputable company, had good reviews, and cost $75 for a 1-month license. I sent Derek an email at 11:43 a.m. The subject line was, "Quick approval needed, FreightLink plugin." The body said, "Derek, FreightLink needs a specialized export format to meet a compliance deadline this Friday. Found a plugin that solves it for $75 per month. Client is panicking, and this is time-sensitive. Can I expense it to my corporate card?" Derek replied at 11:56 a.m. One sentence. "Yep, go ahead. Bill it, and we'll sort out the paperwork later." I screenshot that email out of habit. I'd learned to document everything. I bought the plugin, installed it, configured it, and spent the rest of the day working with FreightLink's team to generate the export they needed. By Wednesday afternoon, they had their documentation. By Friday, they'd submitted everything to customs and avoided penalties. The operations manager sent me a thank you message that said, "You saved us tens of thousands in fines. Seriously, thank you." I filed my expense report that week. $75, categorized under Client Tools and Software, with a note, "Export plugin for FreightLink compliance requirement, pre-approved by D. Hastings." I didn't think about it again. 3 weeks later, Derek called me into a conference room. It was a Wednesday morning. I was in the middle of answering emails when Derek walked past my desk and said, "Got a minute?" Conference room B. His tone was off. Not friendly, not casual. Clipped. I followed him in. He shut the door harder than necessary, sat down, opened his laptop, and spun it around so the screen faced me. My corporate card statement was pulled up. One line was highlighted in yellow, $75, Techbridge plugin services. "Explain this," he said. I looked at it, confused. "That's the plugin I asked you about. For FreightLink. You approved it." "I never approved this." I stared at him. "Derek, I have your email. You told me to go ahead and bill it." His jaw tightened. "I don't remember that conversation. And even if I did, you should have gone through the formal purchase approval process with finance before charging anything to a corporate card." I felt my stomach drop. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was deliberate. "Derek, I followed the exact same process we've always used. You've approved dozens of expenses this way." He leaned back and crossed his arms. "I think you've been playing fast and loose with company funds, and this is a perfect example. This purchase was unauthorized. It was authorized. By you. In writing. Show me." I pulled out my phone, opened my email app, and found the thread. I held it up so he could see his own reply. "Yep, go ahead." He barely glanced at it. "That's not formal approval. That's a casual conversation. You know the policy." I felt heat rising in my face. "Derek, if that's the new standard, then half the expenses in this department are out of policy. You've told me to just handle it on client charges at least 50 times. His expression went cold. "Are you calling me a liar?" "I'm saying I followed the process you established." He stood up and walked to the door. He opened it, leaned out, and said to someone in the hall, "Can you get Linda from HR and call security?" My brain couldn't process what was happening. He turned back to me. "You're being terminated for misuse of company funds and insubordination. Effective immediately," I said. "You're firing me over $75? He said, I'm firing you for theft." Linda from HR appeared in the doorway. Behind her, two guys from building security. Derek looked at them and said, "Please escort Mr. Brennan to his desk so he can collect personal items, then walk him out." I sat there, frozen, feeling like I'd just been hit by a truck. Linda said quietly, "Ryan, we need to go." I stood up. My hands were shaking, but not from fear. From pure, disorienting shock. Security followed me to my desk. Half the office was watching. People I'd worked with for years, people I'd helped on projects, people I'd had lunch with, all of them just staring as I was walked through like a criminal. I was given 10 minutes. I unplugged my phone charger. I grabbed a framed photo of my dog from my shelf. And I opened my bottom desk drawer and pulled out a folder I'd kept for years, something I called my good work file. It was full of printed thank you emails from clients, notes of appreciation, commendations I'd never been formally recognized for. While security watched, I forwarded 3 specific emails to my personal account. Derek's approval of the $75 charge. The thank you email from Meridian's VP after the migration project. A list of every client contact I'd worked with directly, pulled from my calendar. I didn't touch any proprietary files. I didn't download client data or internal documents. I didn't need to. Then I walked out. I sat in my car in the parking lot for 25 minutes, hands on the steering wheel, trying to understand what had just happened. 9 years. 9 years of showing up, fixing problems, saving projects, building relationships. And it ended over $75 that he'd approved in writing. The first week after I got fired was surreal. For 9 years, my phone had been a constant stream of notifications, client emails, urgent texts, Slack messages, calendar alerts for calls and meetings. I'd gotten used to being needed, sometimes annoyingly so. Now silence. I spent the first few days in a weird fog. I filed for unemployment. I updated my resume. I started looking at job boards, but every posting felt wrong. I'd been doing director-level work for coordinator-level pay, and I didn't know how to explain that gap on paper. Then, about a week and a half after I was fired, something strange started happening. Clients started reaching out. The first message came from FreightLink, the logistics company. Their operations manager sent me a LinkedIn message. "Hey Ryan, we haven't heard from you in over a week and nobody at Techbridge is responding to our emails. Is everything okay? Who's handling our account now?" I didn't respond immediately. I wasn't sure what I was allowed to say. Then Meridian Stores sent an email to Techbridge general support address, and someone CC'd me by accident. The email said, "We were informed that Ryan Brennan is no longer with your company. Can someone please explain what happened and confirm who will be managing our account going forward? We have a major upgrade planned for Q2, and Ryan was the only person who understood our full system architecture." I heard through a former coworker that Derek's response was some corporate template about organizational changes, and "Our experienced team will ensure continuity of service." Clients don't trust experienced teams. They trust individual people who've proven they'll pick up the phone at midnight when something breaks. By week 3, I had messages from 5 different clients asking where I'd gone and what my plans were. One of them was Meridian's VP of Operations. He sent me a direct message on LinkedIn that said, "Ryan, I don't know what happened over at Techbridge, but I want you to know that you were the only reason we tolerated some of their mistakes over the years. If you land somewhere good, please let me know. We'd seriously consider moving our contract." I screenshot that message and saved it. I still didn't know what to do with it. Then I got a call from someone I'd never expected. Marcus Chun, the COO of Summit Data Solutions. Summit was one of Techbridge's main competitors. Same industry, same services, similar client base. We'd gone head-to-head on RFPs for years. I'd seen Marcus at industry conferences, always friendly but professional, the kind of person who'd shake your hand and then outbid you the next week. He called me on a Tuesday afternoon, about a month after I'd been fired. "Ryan Brennan?" he said when I answered. "Speaking. This is Marcus Chun from Summit Data Solutions. I heard through the grapevine that you're no longer at Techbridge. Do you have time for a coffee?" I said yes, mostly out of curiosity. We met at a place near my apartment the next day. Marcus was in his mid-40s, sharp dresser, calm energy. He didn't waste time with small talk. "I'm going to be direct with you," he said. "We've been competing with Techbridge for years, and we lose deals to them regularly. Not because their product is better than ours. Frankly, it's not. But because you're better. Clients trust you. They ask for you by name. I've heard it in pitch meetings. Well, if Ryan's managing it, we feel comfortable. So here's my question. What would it take to bring you over to Summit? I blinked. You're offering me a job? I'm offering you a real job. Actual title that matches what you do. Actual salary that matches your value. And if any of your former clients ever decide they want to follow you, and I've heard at least 3 of them are already asking around, we'd want you leading those relationships. I signed a non-solicit, I said. He nodded. I'm not asking you to violate it. I'm not asking you to poach anyone or reach out to former clients. But if they come looking for you on their own and they want to talk to Summit, I want you in that room. Fair. I thought about it. The non-solicit clause in my termination paperwork said I couldn't directly or indirectly solicit clients or employees for 12 months. It didn't say anything about clients choosing to follow me of their own volition. What's the salary range? I asked. He wrote a number on a napkin and slid it across the table. It was $78,000, 40% more than I'd been making at Techbridge. And the title? I asked. Senior Client Success Manager to start. If you perform the way I think you will, we'll bump you to director within a year. I looked at the napkin, then at Marcus. When can I start? I gave Summit 2 weeks to onboard me, during which I signed all the employment paperwork, got set up with systems access, and met the team I'd be working with. The culture was different. People actually got credit for their work. The leadership team asked questions and listened to answers. There was no one like Derek, taking credit for other people's results. On my first official day, I updated my LinkedIn profile. New title, Senior Client Success Manager at Summit Data Solutions. I didn't message any former clients. I didn't post anything about my new role. I just changed the employment line and let LinkedIn's algorithm do the rest. Within 48 hours, I had notifications from a dozen connections who'd viewed my profile. 3 of them were from my old clients. The first one to reach out directly was Meridian Stores. Their VP sent me an email with the subject line, "Congrats on the new role." The body said, "Ryan, happy to see you've landed well. We're actually coming up on our annual contract renewal with Techbridge in about 3 months, and frankly, we've had some concerns about continuity since you left. Would Summit be open to a preliminary conversation about what a transition might look like?" I forwarded it to Marcus. He scheduled a meeting for the following week. FreightLink reached out 2 weeks later. Their operations manager sent me a message that said, "We've been having serious issues since you left Techbridge. The new person they assigned doesn't seem to understand our workflow, and we've had 2 compliance close calls in the past month. We're exploring other vendor options. Can we talk?" I forwarded that to Marcus too. The pharmaceutical client, the one I'd saved from FDA fines 4 years earlier, sent the biggest surprise. Their head of IT sent me an email that said, "Ryan, our annual vendor risk review flagged some concerns about Techbridge's internal governance. Specifically, the way your termination was handled, firing someone over a pre-approved $75 charge, raised questions about their decision-making processes and stability. We're not comfortable renewing with a vendor that treats their best people as disposable. We'd like to schedule a formal meeting with Summit to discuss transitioning our contract." Derek had no idea any of this was happening. He thought firing me meant removing one mid-level employee who'd been getting too big for his britches. He didn't realize he'd fired the entire foundation his client relationships were built on. The first formal transition took about 4 months. Meridian Stores ended their contract with Techbridge and moved everything to Summit. It was a massive undertaking, migrating 15 years of data, retraining their entire IT staff on our platform, rebuilding all their custom reports and dashboards. I led the project personally. I worked with their team the same way I always had. Answered questions at weird hours, explained technical details in plain language, anticipated problems before they became crises. On the day we went live, Meridian's VP sent an email to Marcus and the rest of Summit's leadership team. It said, "This is what client service is supposed to look like. You have a phenomenal team, and Ryan is a huge asset. Thank you for making this transition seamless." Marcus forwarded it to me with a note. "See, this is why we wanted you." Derek found out about the lost contract when Meridian sent Techbridge a formal cancellation notice. I wasn't in the room, but I heard from a former coworker, someone who was still friendly with me, that Derek lost his mind. He called an emergency department meeting, demanded to know why no one had seen this coming, and accused the account team of failing to maintain the relationship. Someone apparently said, They didn't leave because of us. They left because Ryan's gone. Derek, according to my source, went silent for a long moment. Then he said, "They'll be back. We'll win them in the next RFP cycle." They didn't come back. 2 months later, FreightLink moved to Summit. 3 months after that, the pharmaceutical client issued an RFP that included Summit as a preferred bidder and explicitly referenced my involvement as a key decision factor. We won that contract too. Within 18 months, Summit had captured 4 of Techbridge's 7 largest accounts. Our revenue grew by 32%. The company expanded. We hired more people. I got promoted to Director of Client Success, exactly like Marcus had promised. Meanwhile, Techbridge revenue started dropping. The final confrontation, the real one, not the pathetic firing in that conference room, happened at an industry conference about 20 months after I'd been let go. It was a big annual event, 3 days of panels and networking and vendor booths. Summit had a booth. Techbridge had a booth. Both of us were there, competing for attention from the same pool of potential clients. I was scheduled to speak on a panel about client retention strategies. The room was packed, maybe 200 people. Derek was in the audience. I saw him in the third row, arms crossed, watching me with this tight expression on his face. During the Q&A portion, someone from the audience raised their hand and asked, "What's the single most important thing a company can do to keep clients for the long term?" I looked out at the crowd. I didn't look directly at Derek, but I knew he was listening. I said, "Invest in the people who actually do the work." Clients don't stay loyal to brands or products. They stay loyal to individuals who've proven they'll show up when things get hard. If you treat those people as replaceable, if you take credit for their work or throw them under the bus to protect yourself, your clients will notice. And when those people leave, your clients will follow them. Because relationships are built on trust, and trust lives in people, not in company names. The room was quiet for a second. Then someone started clapping, and it spread. I glanced at Derek. He was staring at the floor. After the panel, I was standing near Summit's booth talking to a prospective client when I saw Derek walking toward me. He stopped a few feet away and waited until the client excused themselves. Then he said, "Can we talk?" I said, "Sure." We stepped into a quieter hallway. He looked older. There were lines around his eyes that hadn't been there before. His suit was still expensive, but it didn't fit quite as well. He looked tired. "I wanted to say," he started, then paused. "I wanted to say that I may have overreacted when I let you go." I didn't respond. "The company's been struggling," he continued. "We've lost some major accounts. The executive team is asking a lot of questions. I'm under a lot of pressure." "Okay," I said. "I was wondering," he said slowly, "if there's any chance you'd consider coming back. We could talk about a better title, better compensation. I think we could work something out." I stared at him. He was serious. I said, "Derek, you called me a liar and a thief in front of half the office. You had security walk me out like I'd committed fraud. You did that over $75 that you approved in writing. And now you want me to come back because you're finally facing consequences for your own decisions." His face reddened. "I'm trying to extend an olive branch here. I don't want your olive branch. I want you to understand something. I spent 9 years cleaning up your mistakes and making you look competent. I saved your reputation more times than you'll ever know. And the second you needed a scapegoat, you threw me away. Those clients didn't leave Techbridge because I poached them. They left because they finally saw what I'd been covering up for years, that you were never the reason they stayed. I was." He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. "I'm doing fine," I said. "Better than fine. I have a title that matches my work, a salary that matches my value, and a boss who doesn't take credit for things I do. I don't need to come back. I never did." I walked away. That was the last conversation we ever had. Here's what I know now, 2 years later. Derek still works at Techbridge, but his department has been downsized twice. His title is the same, but his authority is gone. The executive team doesn't trust him anymore. His revenue numbers dropped so drastically that he's no longer seen as untouchable. He's tried to rebuild. He's hired new people, pitched new clients, tried to rebrand his team's image. But the damage is permanent. The industry talks. People know what happened. Clients know. Competitors know. Meanwhile, Summit keeps growing. We brought on 6 new major clients last year. We expanded into 2 new markets. We built a reputation as a company that actually values the people who do the work. I have a team now, 12 people who report to me. I make sure they get credit for their wins. I make sure they're paid fairly. I mentor them, promote them when they're ready, and I never take credit for their work. Because I remember what it felt like to be invisible. Every time one of my team members gets a thank you email from a client, I forward it to the executive team with a note that says, "This is why we're growing." I live in a better apartment now. I have savings. I take actual vacations, and I don't check my email the entire time. I don't think about Derek much anymore. But sometimes I think about that moment in the conference room when he pointed at $75 and called me a thief. He thought he was protecting himself. He thought he was covering some imaginary liability, proving he was a tough manager who didn't tolerate rule-breaking. What he actually did was expose the truth, that his entire career was built on the work of someone he didn't respect enough to protect. And when he threw that person away, the foundation collapsed. I didn't violate my non-solicit agreement. I didn't badmouth Techbridge to clients. I didn't have to. I just moved on. And the clients followed. Not because I convinced them, but because they'd spent years watching who actually showed up for them when it mattered. It wasn't the guy with the big office and the expensive dinners. It was the person who answered the phone at 2 a.m. and fixed the problem. These days, my life is quieter, stable. I work reasonable hours. I have friends outside of work. I'm dating someone I actually have time to see on weekends. I still feel a flash of anger sometimes when I think about those 9 years. About all the times I stayed late, skipped vacations, sacrificed my own time to save Derek's reputation. But mostly, I feel grateful. Because that $75 firing, as humiliating and unfair as it was, forced me to see something I'd been avoiding for years. I was never going to be valued there. No amount of hard work, no amount of saving projects or rescuing client relationships was ever going to change how Derek saw me. I was a tool to him, useful, reliable, and ultimately replaceable. Except I wasn't replaceable. And the second I left, the whole machine fell apart. Derek pointed at $75 and screamed, "Thief." He forgot about the millions of dollars in contracts that walked out the door behind me. I don't feel sorry for him. I feel sorry for the person I used to be, the one who thought loyalty would eventually be rewarded. But I'm not that person anymore. I know my value now, and I'll never let anyone convince me otherwise again.